The rain in New York City that October night did not fall. It was driven like nails into the pavement, a relentless, freezing sheet that turned the loading dock of the Liberty Museum into a cavern of slick concrete and echoing noise. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour that felt less like a time of day and more like a separate, suspended dimension where only the desperate and the dedicated existed. Elena Vance stood just inside the threshold of the bay doors, her arms crossed tight against her chest, shivering slightly despite her heavy wool cardigan. The dampness of the Hudson River had a way of seeping through layers, finding the bone and settling there. She adjusted her glasses, the lenses fogging slightly in the humidity, and checked her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "They're late," she murmured, the sound swallowed by the drumming of rain on the corrugated metal roof. Beside her, leaning casually against a stack of empty pallets, stood Marcus Thorne. The museum director looked as if he had just stepped out of a boardroom meeting, despite the ungodly hour. His navy suit was impeccable, his silver hair brushed back perfectly, and in his hand, incongruously, was a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He took a sip, the bubbles catching the harsh fluorescent light of the loading bay. "Patience, Elena," Marcus said, his voice a smooth baritone that had charmed donors out of millions of dollars for the last decade. "The weather is horrendous, and we aren't moving a crate of apples here. We are moving history." "I don't like it," Elena replied, her eyes fixed on the dark ramp leading down to the street. "Standard protocol for a Tier 1 artifact dictates a direct transfer from JFK. No stops. No dilas. The tracking beacon on the truck has been intermittent for the last 40 minutes. That's a violation of insurance policy, Marcus." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, a gesture of elegant indifference. "Technology is fallible, my dear. The art is what matters. And the praying warrior is finally coming home to the Liberty. Think of the gala on Saturday. Think of the headlines." Elena didn't answer. She wasn't thinking of the headlines. She was thinking of the bronze. The Praying Warrior, a 16th century masterpiece attributed to the Cellini school, had survived wars, revolutions, and the slow decay of 500 years. It was her job to ensure it survived the next 500. She was the lead conservator, the guardian of the object, while Marcus was the guardian of the reputation. Usually, those roles aligned. Tonight, amidst the storm and the inexplicable delay, they felt like friction. Then headlights cut through the deluge. Twin beams of white light swept across the wet asphalt, blinding them for a moment. The low rumble of a heavy diesel engine vibrated in the floorboards beneath Elena's feet. A massive, unmarked black truck reversed slowly down the ramp, its air brakes hissing like a cornered beast. Elena stepped forward, her professional mask sliding into place. She pulled a pair of fresh white cotton gloves from her pocket. "Let's get the bay doors closed the second they clear the threshold," she instructed the night security team. "I want the humidity stabilized immediately." The truck ground to a halt. The engine died, leaving a ringing silence that was quickly filled by the sound of rain hammering the roof. The driver's door opened, and a man jumped down. He didn't look like the specialized art handlers from the usual firms, companies like Artex or Deedle, who wore uniforms and treated crates like incubators. This man wore a greasy windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low. He chewed on a toothpick, looking around the museum bay with uninterested eyes. "Delivery for Thorne," the driver grunted, checking a clipboard that was already damp. "That's me," Marcus said, stepping forward with a beaming smile, ignoring the man's lack of professionalism. "Open it up. Let's see the guest of honor."
Elena frowned.
She looked at the side of the truck. Silverline Logistics. She had never heard of them handling Renaissance bronze. "Marcus, why didn't we use our usual carriers?" she whispered. "Budget cuts, Elena," Marcus murmured back, his smile never wavering for the driver. "Silverline came in at half the bid. They're efficient. Stop worrying." The back of the truck rolled up with a metallic screech. Inside, strapped down with heavy-duty ratchet straps, sat a large wooden crate. It was stamped with customs seals from France and Italy, the wood scarred from its transatlantic journey. "All right, boys, bring it out," The driver yelled. 2 more men emerged from the cab. They looked strong, heavily built, the kind of men who moved pianos or safes, not hollow-cast bronzes. Elena winced as they shoved a pallet jack under the crate with a jarring thud. "Careful," she snapped, stepping into the rain to supervise. "That crate contains a suspended internal frame. If you jar it too hard, you risk snapping the statue's ankles. Slow down." The men glanced at her, then at Marcus. Marcus gave a barely perceptible nod. They slowed down, but the handling was still rough, lacking the fluid grace of experienced art movers. They maneuvered the crate onto the loading dock, the wheels of the pallet jack squealing in protest. Once the crate was inside and the bay doors were sealed, the atmosphere changed. The roar of the rain became a distant hum. The air in the receiving room was cool and dry, filtered by the museum's massive HVAC systems. "Open it," Marcus commanded, placing his empty champagne glass on a workbench. Elena took charge. She picked up her drill, fitted with a specific bit to remove the security screws without stripping the wood. "I need the manifest verified first," she said, adhering to the ritual. She scanned the barcode on the side. It beeped. Verified. She began to unscrew the front panel. The whine of the drill was the only sound in the room. One by one, the screws fell into her palm. She felt a knot of anticipation in her stomach. Despite her misgivings about the transport, this was the part she loved, the reveal, the moment a legend stepped out of the dark. She pried the front panel loose. The smell of fresh pine and old dust wafted out. She pulled back the layers of acid-free tissue paper and high-density foam buffers. And there he was. The praying warrior sat in the dim light of the crate, a figure of haunting sorrow and latent power. He was kneeling, one knee on the ground, his head bowed, hands clasping a sword hilt not in aggression, but in a plea for forgiveness. The bronze was dark, almost black, with flashes of deep chocolate and olive green where the patina had aged over centuries. "Magnificent," Marcus breathed, stepping closer, his eyes gleaming. $50 million of divine guilt. Elena didn't speak. She handed the drill to an assistant and stepped into the breakdown zone. She needed to perform the condition report. This was the most critical moment, establishing that the object had arrived unchanged from its condition in Paris. She knelt beside the statue. Her eyes scanned the surface, looking for fresh scratches, dents, or signs of bronze disease. The powdery blue chlorides that indicated active corrosion. Visually, it was stunning. The details were incredibly sharp. The tension in the warrior's neck muscles, the intricate filigree on the sword hilt, the texture of the chainmail. "It looks pristine," she said softly. "Of course it does," Marcus said, checking his phone. "It's a masterpiece. Now, can we get it to the staging area? I have the gala lighting designers coming in at 8 a.m. "Wait," Elena said. She reached out with her gloved hand. "Conservation is a science, but it is also an instinct. You learn the personality of materials. You learn that marble breathes, that wood moves, and that bronze. Bronze remembers the cold. A solid bronze statue of this size, nearly life-size, acts as a massive thermal sink. It absorbs the ambient temperature slowly. Having been on a truck in a freezing rainstorm for hours, and then in a cold storage dock, the metal should have radiated a profound, bone-aching chill. Elena placed her palm on the warrior's bowed shoulder. She froze. She waited for the bite of the cold, the sensation of heat being drawn rapidly from her hand into the dense metal core. It didn't happen. The shoulder was cool, yes, but not cold. It felt felt dead. She frowned, pressing her hand firmer against the metal. She slid her fingers down to the bicep, then to the chest. The thermal feedback was wrong. The metal was warming up under her hand too quickly. It was as if the heat she was transferring wasn't dissipating deep into the object but was trapped near the surface. "Marcus," she said, not looking up. "What is it now?" Marcus sounded impatient. "Come touch this." Marcus sighed, walking over. He didn't put on gloves. He placed his bare hand on the statue's head. "Feels like metal, Elena. What's the problem?" "It's too warm," she insisted. It's been in a non-climate-controlled truck in 40-degree weather. It should be freezing. This feels like it's been sitting in a heated room. Marcus laughed, a short, sharp bark. You're overthinking it. The truck probably had better insulation than you give it credit for. Or the friction of the road. Or the lights in here. Spotlights don't heat a 400-pound mass of bronze in 3 minutes, Marcus. Elena stood up, peeling off her gloves. The unease in her gut was expanding, turning into a cold dread. And look at the surface texture here on the neck. She pointed to the area where the clavicle met the neck muscles. The patina. In the photos from Paris, there was a patch of micropitting here. Oxidation from the 19th century. I studied the macrophotography for weeks. She leaned in close, squinting. This pitting looks uniform, too rhythmic. Natural corrosion is chaotic. This looks like it was applied with a tool. Marcus's face hardened. The charm evaporated, replaced by the steely gaze of a man who did not like to be contradicted. He stepped into her personal space, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Elena.
Look at me. She looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. We have the mayor coming on Saturday. We have the board of directors. We have donors who have pledged enough money to build the new wing based solely on this exhibition. I do not need my lead conservator having a neurotic episode because she's tired. This statue was authenticated by the Louvre. It was authenticated by customs. It is real. Do you understand? I'm not being neurotic. I'm being thorough, Elena countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. If there is a structural issue, or if there's been a restoration we weren't told about. There is no issue. Marcus snapped, loud enough that the movers looked over. He composed himself quickly, smoothing his tie. Get it to the pedestal. That is an order, Elena. Go home. Sleep. You're seeing things that aren't there. He turned on his heel and walked away, pulling his phone out to make a call. Elena stood alone next to the statue. She watched the movers approach with the pallet jack. Lift on 3, the driver grunted. 1, 2, 3. The two men heaved on the straps to shift the statue slightly so they could secure it for the final move. Elena watched their muscles. She knew the physics of weight. The praying warrior was recorded in the archives as weighing 485 kilograms, over 1,000 pounds. The men lifted. They strained, yes, but there was a moment, a split second, where the statue seemed to come up faster than they expected. One of the movers actually stumbled back a half step, overcompensating for a resistance that wasn't fully there. Whoa, easy, the mover muttered. Shifted the center of gravity. Elena said nothing. She stepped back into the shadows of the loading bay. Her mind was racing, connecting dots she didn't want to connect. The delay, the sketchy transport company, the warmth of the metal, the texture of the patina, the way the movers lifted it. She watched as they wheeled the statue out of the receiving bay and toward the freight elevator. The praying warrior bobbed slightly on the uneven floor. It was too light. She was sure of it now. It wasn't a matter of pounds. It was a matter of density. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. It is heavy, dense, and unforgiving. The object on that cart moved like it had a secret. Marcus was gone. The bay doors were closing, shutting out the rain and the city. The museum was locking down for the night. Elena walked over to her desk in the corner of the lab. She didn't go home. She couldn't. The image of the statue's surface texture burned in her mind. Too rhythmic. She sat down and logged into the museum's secure server. She pulled up the digitized loan agreement from Italy. Then, she opened a second window and accessed the live feed from the loading bay security cameras. Rewinding to 10 minutes ago. She zoomed in on the faces of the movers. She zoomed in on the license plate of the Silverline truck. You're not real, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know what you are, but you are not the warrior. The silence of the museum pressed in on her. Upstairs, the galleries were filled with thousands of years of human truth. Stone, canvas, gold. But down here, Elena felt the chilling presence of a lie that was worth $50 million. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a set of calipers and a thermal imaging gun. She waited until the elevator indicator showed that the movers had reached the second floor and left the building. Marcus thought she was going home to sleep. He thought she was a tired employee he could bully into submission. He was wrong. Elena stood up, grabbing her equipment. She wasn't going to the exit. She was going to the archives. She needed to see the original shipping weights from 1942, the last time the statue crossed the ocean. She needed numbers. She needed physics. And if physics confirmed what her fingertips suspected, she was going to need to do something that would either save her career or end it. She walked out of the loading bay, her footsteps echoing down the long, dark corridor. The storm outside raged on, but the real storm was just beginning inside the Liberty Museum. The Liberty Museum after hours was a necropolis of civilizations, a silent kingdom where the air conditioner's hum sounded like the collective breathing of 5,000 years of history. Elena Vance moved through the Hall of Antiquities, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished marble floor. She kept her flashlight off, navigating by the ambient glow of the emergency exit signs and the flashes of lightning that periodically illuminated the high, vaulted glass ceiling. To her left, the marble bust of a Roman senator seemed to watch her with blind, disapproving eyes. To her right, a glass case containing Aztec ceremonial daggers gleamed sharply in the gloom. She felt like a thief. The irony twisted in her stomach. She was the one person whose entire life was dedicated to protecting these objects. Yet here she was, creeping through the shadows to avoid the security patrols, hunting for evidence against the man who signed her paychecks. The archives were located in the sub-basement, 2 levels below the conservation lab where the praying warrior currently sat in the dark. To get there, Elena had to bypass the main security hub. She knew the rotation. The night shift supervisor, a gruff ex-cop named Miller, usually took his coffee break at 3:15 a.m. It was 3:12 a.m. She pressed herself into the alcove of a display featuring 18th-century French ball gowns. Waiting. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the tile. Miller walked past, the beam of his heavy maglite swinging lazily back and forth. He was humming a tune, completely unaware that 10 feet away, his lead conservator was holding her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Once the heavy steel door of the break room clicked shut, Elena moved. She didn't run. Running attracted attention, but walked with a swift, predatory purpose toward the service stairwell. The air grew cooler as she descended. The sub-basement smelled of vinegar and decaying lignin, the scent of old paper slowly surrendering to time. This was the museum's memory, a labyrinth of rolling metal shelves packed with gray archival boxes. While the current loan agreements were digital, stored on the secure cloud, the Liberty possessed physical records dating back to its founding in the 1920s. Marcus could manipulate a PDF. He could edit a digital spreadsheet. But he couldn't change ink that had dried 80 years ago. Elena reached the heavy fire door of the archives. It was locked, naturally. She pulled out her keychain. As a senior staff member, she had a master key, but every swipe of her electronic fob was logged in the central server. If she swiped in now, Marcus would see the timestamp in the morning. Elena Vance accessed archives at 3:20 a.m. He would know she was digging. She stared at the card reader, the red LED blinking like a warning eye. She couldn't use her fob. "Think, Elena," she whispered to herself. She remembered the maintenance logs. The humidity control system in the archives had been acting up last week. The HVAC technicians had been down here servicing the vents. To allow easy access, they often used a manual override key for the janitorial access panel next to the door. She crouched down, running her fingers along the top of the door frame. Nothing. She checked the fire extinguisher box mounted on the wall. She lifted the extinguisher slightly. There it was. A small, brass physical key, hidden by a lazy contractor who didn't want to sign it back in at the front desk. "Sloppy," she muttered, grabbing the key. "But thank you." She unlocked the door manually. No electronic ping. No digital footprint. She slipped inside and closed the door softly, plunging herself into total darkness. She clicked on her small penlight, the beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the dusty air. The archives were vast. Rows of metal shelving stretched out into the gloom, labeled with call numbers. She needed the provenance files for the praying warrior. The statue had a long, tortured history. It had been part of the Liberties collection in the 1940s before being restituted to Italy in a diplomatic gesture in the late 90s. Now it was back on loan. If Marcus was trying to pull a swap, he would be counting on the current digital records matching his fabricated paperwork. He wouldn't expect anyone to cross-reference the physical intake logs from World War II. She found the section, European sculpture/bronze/16th century. Her fingers walked across the spines of the boxes. Box 402, Box 403, Box 404. She pulled Box 404 off the shelf. It was heavy, filled with manila folders that felt brittle to the touch. She carried it to a small wooden table in the corner, setting her flashlight down so it illuminated the workspace. She began to dig. She bypassed the glossy brochures and the correspondence with the Italian Ministry of Culture. She was looking for the shipping manifest from 1942. The statue had been shipped from London to New York to save it from the Blitz. "Come on," she hissed, flipping through yellowed pages covered in typewriter ink. "Talk to me." She found it. A carbon copy of a bill of lading from the Cunard White Star Line, dated November 14, 1942. Item: bronze sculpture, The Penitent Soldier, alternate title. Gross weight, crated 1,210 pounds. Net weight, object 1,069 pounds. Elena pulled a notepad from her pocket. She did the conversion quickly. 1,069 pounds was approximately 485 kilograms. She stared at the number. 485 kilograms. Then she pulled out her smartphone. Her hands were shaking slightly as she logged into the museum's current logistics portal. She had to bypass 2 security warnings to view the active shipment data for the Silverline Logistics delivery that had arrived late that night. There it was. The digital manifest Marcus had signed off on. Item: bronze sculpture, The Praying Warrior. Net weight, 468 kilograms. Elena did the math again. 17 kilograms. Nearly 40 pounds. "Physics doesn't lie," she whispered. "History doesn't change." A solid bronze cast from the Cellini workshop would be consistent. The alloy mix, roughly 90% copper, 10% tin, had a specific gravity. For the statue to lose 17 kilograms, a massive amount of metal would have to be missing. Or, more likely, the object sitting upstairs wasn't solid bronze. It was a composite, a high-tech shell with a lighter, cheaper core. She took a photo of the 1942 document. Then she shoved the folder back into the box. This was the smoking gun, but it wasn't enough. A lawyer could argue the 1942 scale was inaccurate. They could argue the statue had been conserved, cleaned, or modified in the last 80 years to reduce weight. Marcus would spin this. He would say she was relying on archaic data. She needed to know who Silverline Logistics was. She sat on the floor, leaning her back against the metal shelving, and used her phone to run a corporate background check. It was a paid service she used for vetting art dealers. She typed in Silverline Logistics LLC. The results loaded slowly on the basement's weak Wi-Fi signal. Incorporated, Delaware, 6 months ago. Registered agent, a generic legal firm in Wilmington. Fleet size, 2 vehicles. 2 vehicles?
Elena scoffed.
For an international art transport? She scrolled down. The company's operating address was listed as a unit in an industrial park in Newark, New Jersey. She switched apps to Google Maps and dropped a pin on the address. Street View showed a desolate stretch of chain-link fence and a rusted warehouse with a sign that read Kowalski Auto Body. There was no logistics hub, no climate-controlled storage. It was a shell company, a ghost. Marcus hadn't just hired a cheap mover. He had hired a criminal front. A sudden noise from the floor above made her freeze. It was the sound of the elevator motor engaging. The heavy hydraulic whine vibrated through the steel beams of the building. Someone was coming down to the sub-basement. Elena scrambled up, shoving the box back onto the shelf. She killed her flashlight. The darkness rushed back in, absolute and suffocating. She heard the elevator ding, followed by the slide of the doors. I'm telling you, I saw a light on the security cam for a split second, a voice said. It wasn't Miller. It was a sharper, younger voice. Probably just a reflection from the storm, boss. Another voice replied. Deeper. Resonant. Check the door, the first voice commanded. Elena pressed herself into the narrow gap between two rows of shelves. She held her breath, her hand clamped over her mouth. She recognized the first voice now. It was the driver of the truck. The man in the greasy windbreaker. Why was he still here? The delivery was done. Unless they weren't just delivery men. The door handle to the archives rattled. Elena prayed she had locked it. She hadn't. She had used the key to enter, but in her haste, had she turned the deadbolt back? The handle turned. The door creaked open. A beam of light, far more powerful than her penlight, swept across the room. It cut through the dust motes, illuminating the rows of silent boxes. See? The deep voice said. Nobody here, just dead paper. Sweep it anyway, the driver snapped. Thorne is paranoid. He thinks the girl knows something. The girl. They meant her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought they would hear it. She squeezed her eyes shut as the flashlight beam danced closer. It swept over the floor, tracing the path she had walked. We need to get back upstairs, the deep voice said. Thorne wants the crates moved to the secondary staging area before the morning crew comes in. He says he wants to re-inspect the packing materials. He's covering his tracks, the driver muttered. If that girl checks the crate weight against the manifest, she's gone home. Thorne saw her leave. Thorne is an idiot. If she comes back. The flashlight beam stopped. It was resting on the table where Elena had been working. Elena stopped breathing. Had she left the folder out? No, she put it back. But the dust. The layer of dust on the table would be disturbed. The driver walked over to the table. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. He ran a finger across the surface. Elena watched through the slit in the shelving. She saw his silhouette against the light. He paused. Rats, the deep voice said from the doorway. Place is full of them. Let's go. The driver hesitated. For a second, Elena thought he would turn and walk right down her aisle. He seemed to sense something, a displacement in the air, a scent of perfume, the heat of a living body. Yeah, the driver finally said. Rats. He turned and walked out. The door clicked shut. The lock engaged. Elena slid down to the floor, her legs turning to jelly. She gasped for air, her lungs burning. They were still here. Marcus wasn't just committing insurance fraud. He was working with people who would hurt her if they found her. She checked the time.
3:45 a.m.
She had the paper trail. She knew about the weight. She knew Silverline was a fake. But the men upstairs were moving the crates. They were re-inspecting the packing materials. That meant they were likely destroying the evidence of the weight discrepancy on the crate markings. They were sanitizing the crime scene. If she went to the police now with just a photo of an old document and a Google Maps search, they would take a report. They might investigate in a few days. By then, the fake statue would be on the podium and the real one, wherever it was, would be halfway to Russia or China. She couldn't wait for the police. She needed something undeniable. Something that would force the NYPD to shut down the building immediately. She needed to see inside the statue. The X-ray room was on the floor above. It was a restricted zone, encased in lead-lined walls. If she could get the praying warrior into the chamber and run a high-penetration scan, she would have an image that no amount of lying could explain. A 16th-century statue should be hollow, with an armature of iron bands and clay. A modern fake would be different. It might have a steel skeleton, welded joints, or polymer fillers. But getting a 400-pound statue into the X-ray room alone?
Impossible.
Unless she remembered the pallet jack. The movers had left it in the receiving bay. And the statue was currently on a wheeled cart in the conservation lab, not yet on its final plinth. The conservation lab was directly connected to the X-ray suite. It was risky. If Marcus or his goons came back to the lab while she was scanning, there would be no place to hide. They would trap her in the radiation chamber. Elena stood up. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but it was being overtaken by a fierce, protective anger. They were desecrating her museum. They were stealing history and replacing it with a lie. "Not on my watch," she whispered. She grabbed the brass key and slipped it into her pocket. She moved back to the service stairwell. She wasn't going to sneak out. She was going upstairs. The storm outside battered the building, a crescendo of thunder shaking the foundations. It was the perfect cover. The noise would mask the hum of the generator. It would mask the sound of the X-ray machine powering up. Elena Vance began to climb the stairs, leaving the paper trail behind. She was done with reading history. It was time to use science to expose the present. As she reached the landing of the ground floor, she cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, but she could hear voices coming from the far end, near the loading dock. Marcus and the men were busy. She had maybe 20 minutes before they came back to check the lab. She slipped into the corridor, moving like a ghost toward the conservation wing. The praying warrior was waiting for her in the dark, and she was going to tear off its metal skin and see what heart beat beneath. The corridor leading to the conservation lab was a wind tunnel of silence, the air pressure dropping as the storm outside hammered against the building's reinforced masonry. Elena moved not with the stealth of a thief, but with the terrifying clarity of a surgeon entering an operating theater where the patient was already dead. The brass key from the archives burned a cold weight in her pocket, a physical token of the line she had just crossed. She reached the double doors of the lab. This was her sanctuary. For 5 years, she had spent more waking hours in this room than in her own apartment. It was a place of quiet restoration, of cotton swabs and magnifying lenses, of bringing the past back to life. But tonight, as she pushed the door open, the room felt like a crime scene. The emergency lights cast long, skeletal shadows across the workbenches. In the center of the room, sitting on a temporary rolling gantry, was the praying warrior. In the semi-darkness, the statue looked less like a masterpiece of the Italian Renaissance and more like an intruder. The bowed head, usually a symbol of penitence, now seemed mocking. The hands clasping the sword hilt didn't look like they were praying. They looked like they were waiting to strike. Elena paused, her hand on the light switch, then pulled it back. She couldn't risk the main overheads. The spill of light would be visible from the loading bay cameras down the hall. She had to work in the gloom. "Okay," she whispered, her breath hitching slightly. "Let's see what you're made of." She approached the gantry. The statue was strapped to a wooden pallet that sat atop the steel table. To get it into the X-ray suite, she needed to lower it to the floor or find a way to wheel the entire assembly into the lead-line vault at the back of the lab. The gantry wheels were locked. She knelt, disengaging the brakes. Click, 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 click. The sounds were pistol shots in the quiet room. She grabbed the handles of the cart. The floor of the lab was smooth epoxy, designed for moving heavy artifacts, but the praying warrior was supposed to be nearly half a ton of bronze. Inertia should have been her enemy. She braced her foot against the table leg, prepared to heave with her entire body weight to get the mass moving. She pushed. The cart rolled forward with a disturbing ease. It didn't glide, but neither did it fight her. It moved like a sedan, not a tank. Elena stumbled slightly, her center of gravity thrown off by the lack of resistance. A shiver of vindication went down her spine, colder than the air in the room. The physics were wrong. Every muscle in her body, trained by years of handling stone and metal, screamed that this object was a lie. "You're a featherweight," she hissed at the bronze face. "You're nothing but air and lies." She steered the cart toward the back wall. The X-ray facility at the Liberty Museum was a point of pride, a retrofitted vault designed for industrial radiography. It was built to shoot through sarcophagi and iron-banded chests. It was a concrete box lined with 4 millimeters of lead, sealed by a sliding door that weighed as much as a small car. Elena punched the code into the keypad by the vault door. 1-9-4-2. The year the real statue had last crossed the ocean. It was her personal mnemonic, a number that now felt like a prophecy. The heavy door motorized open with a low, grinding rumble that vibrated through the floor. The sound was dangerously loud. Elena froze, looking back toward the hallway entrance. Nothing. Just the shadows and the distant, muffled boom of thunder. The storm was her accomplice. The sky was screaming loud enough to hide her sins. She pushed the cart into the vault. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of ozone and ionized air, the scent of radiation. She positioned the statue in the center of the target zone, directly beneath the emitter arm of the GE monolith sealing tube. Now came the hard part. Setup. Industrial X-ray isn't like a medical snapshot. You don't just point and click. It requires geometry. Elena worked with frantic efficiency. She grabbed the large digital detector plate, a flat panel the size of a coffee table, worth more than her annual salary, and positioned it behind the statue. She had to align the emitter, the object, and the detector perfectly. She adjusted the collimator on the tube head, narrowing the beam. She didn't need to see the whole statue. She just needed a cross-section of the torso, the heart of the warrior. That was where the internal armature would be most complex. If it was real, she would see the chaotic, hand-wrought iron bars used by 16th-century sculptors to support the clay core. If it was fake, well, she didn't know exactly what she would see, but she knew it would look too clean. She stepped back, checking the angles. The laser crosshairs on the X-ray tube painted a red X directly over the warrior's left breast. "Perfect," she murmured. She hurried out of the vault. The safety protocols required the room to be sealed. She hit the button to close the lead door. The motor groaned again, and the massive slab of metal slid shut, sealing the praying warrior in the dark. Elena rushed to the control console, a bank of monitors shielded behind a lead glass window. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, logging into the imaging software. User E_Vance. * password. The system booted up. The X-ray in use warning light above the console flickered red. She set the parameters. Voltage, 320 kV. Current, 10 milliamperes. Exposure time, 45 seconds. She needed high energy to punch through the bronze shell. She hovered her finger over the expose button. Then the door to the conservation lab flew open. It wasn't the slow, creeping opening of a spy. It was a violent intrusion. The double doors banged against the walls, rebounding with a crash that cut through the thunder. Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway. He was wet. He must have gone outside to the loading dock and come back in. Rainwater dripped from the hem of his expensive coat, pooling on the floor. His hair was plastered to his forehead, ruining the carefully cultivated image of the distinguished director. Behind him, looming in the hallway like gargoyles, were the two men from the truck. "Elena," Marcus said. His voice was breathless, not from exertion, but from a mix of fury and fear. "What are you doing?" Elena didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the console, her finger hovering millimeters above the button. "I'm doing my job, Marcus. Condition report. Standard procedure." At 4 in the morning, Marcus walked into the room. His footsteps were wet slaps on the epoxy. "Step away from the console, Elena. Now." "I found the shipping manifests in the archives," Elena said, her voice trembling but loud enough to be heard over the hum of the cooling fans. The original weight was 485 kilograms. The crate Silverline delivered is 40 pounds light. "Explain that, Marcus." Marcus stopped halfway to the console. He signaled to the men behind him to stay at the door. He composed himself, wiping the rain from his face with a trembling hand. "Records are wrong all the time," he said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Clerical errors. You're going to ruin your career over a typo?" "It's not a typo. And it's not just the weight. It's the thermal conductivity. It's the patina. And why is Silverline Logistics registered to a derelict auto body shop in Newark?" Marcus's face went slack. The pretense dropped. The mask of the cultured director dissolved, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. He looked at the closed vault door, then at the computer screen. "You haven't scanned it yet," he noted. He saw the ready status on the screen. "I'm about to," Elena said. "Don't." Marcus took a step closer. Elena, listen to me. Really listen. You think this is about art? This is about survival. Do you know who bought the original? A man named Volkov. He's not a collector, he's an oligarch. He paid 20 million in cash. Cash, Elena. That money is already spent. Covered the debts. It saved the museum from bankruptcy last quarter. You didn't know that, did you? We were going under. I saved us. You sold our heritage, Elena spat. You stole from the public trust. I saved the institution. Marcus roared, his voice cracking. What good is a bronze statue if the lights get turned off? If the staff gets fired? I did this for us. You did it for your gambling debts, Elena corrected him. I saw the markers in your office trash months ago. I just didn't want to believe it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The pleading vanished. If you press that button, Elena, you don't just expose a fake. You destroy me. And if I go down, Volkov's men, they aren't like me. They don't have tenure. They don't care about your degree. They will come for you. He gestured to the two men at the door. These gentlemen work for him. They are here to ensure the shipment leaves for the port. They are not patient. Elena looked at the men. They were staring at her with dead, bovine eyes. They weren't security guards. They were cleaners. Step away from the console, Marcus repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Walk out of here. Go home. Forget you saw anything. I'll give you a raise. I'll make you head curator. Just walk away. Elena looked at him. She thought of the 5 years she had spent in this basement, preserving history. She thought of the praying warrior, a soldier who had laid down his sword to pray for forgiveness. I can't do that, she said. Why? Marcus screamed. Why be a martyr for a piece of metal? Because it's the truth, Elena whispered. She slammed her hand down on the expose button. Click hum. The machine roared to life. The high-voltage warning siren chirped once. A piercing electronic shriek. No! Marcus lunged for her. He grabbed her by the shoulder, spinning her around. He was strong, fueled by adrenaline. He threw her back against the file cabinets. Elena gasped as the metal handle dug into her spine. Turn it off, Marcus shouted, reaching for the emergency stop button. It's too late, Elena yelled, sliding to the floor. The image captures in real time. Marcus froze. He looked up at the monitors. The screen flickered from black to a grainy gray static, and then the image resolved. It was a ghostly, translucent rendering of the statue standing inside the vault. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. On the screen, the silhouette of the warrior was clear. But inside, there was no chaotic, organic struggle of clay and iron. There was no soul of the Renaissance. Instead, the X-ray revealed a skeleton of perfect, sterile geometry. A central support column made of what looked like stainless steel tubing. Radiating out from it were uniform struts, held in place by hexagonal nuts that glowed bright white on the screen. Machined steel, unmistakable and anachronistic. And filling the void between the metal skin and the steel skeleton was a faint, honeycomb pattern. Polystyrene, Elena said, her voice shaking but triumphant. She pulled herself up from the floor. It's filled with packing foam. Marcus stared at the screen. The image was a death sentence. It was irrefutable proof. A 16th century statue does not contain hex bolts and industrial foam. You idiot, Marcus whispered. He turned to her, his face pale as ash. You stupid, arrogant idiot. You've killed us both. He looked toward the door. The two men were already moving. They didn't run. They walked with a terrifying, heavy purpose. They entered the lab, closing the distance to the control booth. Grab her, the driver said. His voice was bored, as if he were ordering a sandwich. Elena backed up, pressing herself against the console. Her hand brushed against the keyboard. She had one card left to play. The scan, she said, her voice high and breathless. It autosaves. We'll delete it, Marcus said, backing away as the men advanced. We'll burn the hard drive. It doesn't save to the hard drive, Elena lied. She didn't know if the cloud sync was active, but she had to make them believe it. It uploads to the offsite server immediately. The board of directors has mirror access. They just got a notification. The driver stopped. He looked at Marcus. Is that true? Marcus looked panicked. I don't know. The IT upgrades last month. If the board sees this, Elena pressed, gaining confidence. The police will be here in 10 minutes. If you hurt me, it's murder. If you leave now, it's just theft. You can still run. The second man, the silent one, pulled a gun from his jacket. It was a small, black pistol, ugly and real. We don't run, he said. Elena stopped breathing. The bluff hadn't worked. They didn't care about the police. They were cleaners. Wait, Marcus shouted, stepping between the gunman and Elena. Move, Thorn, the gunman said. No. If you shoot her here, the forensics will be impossible to clean. The gala is in 2 days. The police presence. Marcus was rambling, trying to find a logic that would save his own skin, if not hers. We take her with us, the driver decided. Put her in the truck. We'll deal with her at the docks. And get that hard drive. The gunman holstered the weapon and reached for Elena. She scrambled back, grabbing a heavy bronze pestle from the workbench, but he swatted it away like a toy. His hand clamped around her wrist, crushing and painful. Let go of me, she screamed, thrashing. Quiet. The man growled. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her toward the door. Marcus stood there, watching. He looked sick. He looked at the screen, at the skeletal image of his own corruption, and then at Elena being dragged away. I'm sorry, Elena, he whispered. I really am. Marcus. She screamed as she was hauled into the hallway. They're going to kill me. Do something. Marcus turned his back. He began ripping cables out of the computer tower. Elena was dragged down the corridor, her heels skidding on the polished floor. The gunman's grip was iron. They were heading for the loading dock. The Silverline truck was waiting. Her mind raced. The scan was done. The proof existed. But it was trapped in a computer that Marcus was currently destroying. And she was being taken to a secondary location, the one phrase in every crime drama that meant no return. As they passed the fire alarm pull station near the elevators, Elena threw her weight to the side. It was a desperate move. She didn't try to break free. She used her momentum to slam her shoulder into the wall. Hey! The gunman grunted, tightening his grip, but she had made contact. Her shoulder struck the plastic cover of the alarm. Cracked. With her free hand, she clawed at the lever. Clack. For a second, nothing happened. Then the world exploded in sound. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The strobes flashed, blinding white light pulsing in sync with the ear-splitting siren. The fire doors in the hallway began to automatically magnet release and slam shut. Damn it! The driver shouted, covering his ears. Get her to the truck. Move. They dragged her faster now, panic making them rougher. They burst out onto the loading dock. The storm hit them instantly, wind, rain, and noise. The black truck was idling, its exhaust coughing white smoke into the wet night. Open the back. The gunman yelled to the driver. Elena was shoved toward the rear of the truck. She saw the empty cavern where the crate had been. Please, she begged, the rain mixing with the tears on her face. You don't have to do this. Get in, the gunman said, shoving her. She stumbled, her shin hitting the metal bumper. She scrambled up, looking for a way out, but the loading dock was a concrete canyon. There was nowhere to run. Then, through the curtain of rain, she saw headlights. Not the yellow beams of a truck, but the flashing blue and red of authority. The silent alarm. She hadn't just pulled the fire alarm. The silent alarm she had triggered in the vault, the one she told Marcus about, was linked to the NYPD priority response for high-value theft. Cops! The driver screamed. Thorne sold us out. The gunman looked at the approaching lights, then at Elena. He made a calculation. She was dead weight. A hostage slowed them down. He pistol-whipped her. The blow caught her on the temple. The world spun violently, dissolving into a kaleidoscope of rain and strobe lights. Elena fell onto the wet concrete of the loading dock, the taste of copper filling her mouth. She heard the truck doors slam. The engine roared. Tires squealed on the wet pavement as the truck peeled out, smashing through the wooden safety arm of the exit gate. Elena lay there, the rain washing over her. She tried to lift her head. She saw the taillights of the truck disappearing into the storm. "They're getting away," she mumbled, her vision blurring. The statue. But they didn't have the statue. The fake was in the vault. The truck was empty. Wait, the real statue. Marcus had said it was on the ship. The Oceanic Star. Departing from New Jersey. Elena forced herself to sit up. The sirens were deafening now. A squad car screeched up the ramp, officers spilling out with guns drawn. But they were too late for the truck. And they were too late for the ship. Elena looked at her watch through a cracked lens.
4:15 a.m.
The ship left at high tide. She needed to tell them. She needed to tell someone. But as the adrenaline crashed, darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision. The blow to her head was taking its toll. "The port," she whispered to the first officer who reached her. "Pier 4. Then the world went black. The return to consciousness was not a gentle awakening. It was a collision. Elena Vance gasped, her body arching off the stretcher as her lungs dragged in air that smelled of rubbing alcohol, diesel exhaust, and the coppery tang of her own blood. The world was a blur of oscillating lights, red, white, blue, spinning in a nauseating rhythm that synchronized with the throbbing hammer inside her skull. She tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed her back down, pinning her shoulder to the thin mattress. "Stay down, ma'am. You've got a severe laceration on your temple. You need to stay still." The voice was young, professional, and detached. "Paramedic." He was hovering over her, his face a smear of pale skin and blue uniform in the strobe-lit interior of the ambulance. Elena blinked, trying to clear the static from her vision. The rain was still hammering against the metal roof of the vehicle, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown from the sky. "The time," Elena croaked. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "What time is it?" "It's 4:25, ma'am. We're stabilizing you before transport to Mount Sinai. Your vitals are a little erratic, which is to be expected given the head trauma."
4:25 a.m.
The number cut through the fog of her concussion like a scalpel. The tide, the ship, the Oceanic Star wasn't waiting for her recovery. It was waiting for the Atlantic Ocean to rise enough to float its hull out of the Kill Van Kull Channel. "I can't go to the hospital," Elena said, struggling against the strap across her chest. "I have to talk to the police. Now." "The police are securing the scene, ma'am. You're the victim of an assault. They'll take your statement at the ER." "No." She shouted the word, and the effort sent a spike of agony through her left eye that nearly made her vomit. She grit her teeth, forcing the pain into a box in the back of her mind. "The theft isn't over. You don't understand. They're getting away." She reached up, grabbing the paramedic's sleeve with a bloody hand. "Get me the detective, the one in charge. Get him now, or I swear I will walk out of this ambulance while it's moving." The paramedic looked at her, startling at the ferocity in her eyes. He hesitated, then leaned toward the open back doors of the ambulance where the rain was blowing in. He shouted over the siren of a passing cruiser. "Hey, detective, she's awake. She's asking for you." A moment later, a figure stepped into the frame of the doors. He was a large man, wearing a trench coat that was soaked through to a shade of charcoal black. He ducked his head to enter the cramped space, bringing with him the smell of wet pavement and stale tobacco. He had the weary, etched face of a man who had seen too many crime scenes at too many ungodly hours. "Detective Rodriguez, NYPD Major Case," he said, flipping a badge that caught the light. He looked at Elena with a mixture of sympathy and professional appraisal. "You took a nasty hit, Ms. Vance. The EMTs say you need a scan. Did you get Marcus?" Elena asked, ignoring his concern. Rodriguez nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "We found Director Thorne in his office trying to shred documents. He surrendered without incident. We also have the surveillance footage from the loading dock, thanks to your little trick with the fire alarm. We see the truck leaving. We have an APB out for a black box truck, New Jersey plates. We'll find them, Ms. Vance. Highway Patrol is locking down the bridges. You won't find them on the highway, Elena said, sitting up again. This time, the paramedic didn't stop her. He just adjusted the 4-line in her arm. And the truck doesn't matter. The truck is empty. Rodriguez paused, his pen hovering over the paper. Empty? We saw them loading. They didn't load anything, Elena interrupted, speaking fast, fighting the slur in her speech. The statue in the vault, the one I scanned, is the fake. The real praying warrior was never in the museum tonight. It was never in the truck. Marcus told me. It's on a ship. Rodriguez frowned, his eyes narrowing. A ship? The Oceanic Star, Elena said. It's docked at Pier 4 in New Jersey. It's leaving on the morning high tide. Marcus sold it to a Russian buyer. If that ship leaves the harbor, the statue is gone. It becomes a diplomatic ghost. You have to stop it. Rodriguez looked at her, then at the paramedic, then back to her. He wiped rain from his forehead. Ms. Vance, with all due respect, you have a concussion. Thorne is in cuffs. We have the fake in the vault, which is still evidence of fraud. We have a crime scene here that spans 3 floors. I can't just abandon a primary scene based on hearsay from a suspect who was trying to save his own skin. It's not hearsay. Elena swung her legs off the stretcher, her boots hitting the metal floor with a thud. The world tilted violently, but she grabbed the grab bar to steady herself. Physics, detective. The weight was off. The archives proved it. Marcus confirmed it. Why do you think he was so desperate to stop the X-ray? He wasn't protecting the fake. He was buying time for the real one to leave the country. She stared at him, her eyes wide and desperate. Look at the logistics. Pier 4 is a ghost pier. It's used for shadow cargo. Silverline Logistics is a shell company. It all fits. You have an APB out for a truck that is probably already burning in a ditch somewhere in Queens. Meanwhile, $50 million of Renaissance history is sitting in a container across the river, waiting for the water to rise. Rodriguez closed his notebook. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the blood matting her hair, the dilation of her pupils, but he also saw the unshakable certainty of an expert. He was a good cop because he knew when to follow procedure and when to follow a lead. High tide, Rodriguez muttered. He checked his watch. When is it? It varies by the channel, Elena said. But for a vessel that size at Pier 4? Around 5 a.m. Maybe 5:15. We have less than 45 minutes. Rodriguez stood silent for a second, the rain drumming on the roof. Then he turned to the paramedic. Wrap her head. She's coming with me. Detective, that is against protocol. The paramedic protested. I'm taking custody of the witness for an urgent field identification, Rodriguez barked. If she passes out, I'll drive her to the ER myself. Disconnect the line. He turned back to Elena, a grim smile touching the corner of his mouth. You better be right, Vance. Because if I drag my partner across state lines into New Jersey jurisdiction without a warrant and come up empty, I'm going to be writing traffic tickets in Staten Island for the rest of my career. I'm right, Elena said, letting the paramedic tape a thick gauze pad over her temple. Drive fast. The unmarked Dodge Charger was built for speed, and Rodriguez drove it like he hated it. They tore out of the museum's loading zone, sirens wailing, scattering the gathered crowd of onlookers and press photographers who had just begun to circle like vultures. The car fishtailed slightly on the wet cobblestones of Soho before gripping the asphalt and shooting north toward the Holland Tunnel. Elena sat in the passenger seat, gripping the oh-shit handle above the door. The motion of the car made her stomach churn, but the adrenaline was acting as a temporary anchor. Rodriguez was on the radio barking codes and requests to dispatch. Dispatch, this is Unit Alpha 19. I need a priority connect to Port Authority Police, New Jersey side. Tell them we have a potential grand larceny moving through Newark Bay. Requesting a harbor block on a commercial vessel, the Oceanic Star. There was a crackle of static, Then the dispatcher's voice, sounding bored and skeptical. Alpha 19, Port Authority is asking for a warrant number. That's federal jurisdiction if it's on the water. Tell them the warrant is my badge and a pissed-off curator. Rodriguez shouted, slamming his hand on the steering wheel as he weaved through a gap in the early morning delivery trucks. Just get them on the line. He glanced over at Elena. You okay? I'm fine, she lied. The streetlights were smearing into long ribbons of light. Why New Jersey? Why not ship it from Brooklyn? Less scrutiny, Rodriguez explained, his eyes scanning the mirrors. Newark and Elizabeth ports are massive. Thousands of containers a day. It's easier to hide a needle in a stack of needles. Plus, the old piers like number 4 are practically unmonitored. If they paid off the right dockmaster, they could load a nuclear warhead and nobody would blink. They hit the entrance to the Holland Tunnel. The sudden transition from the dark, rainy night to the harsh, yellow artificial light of the tunnel was blinding. The roar of the engine echoed off the tiled walls. Marcus said something about Volkov, Elena said, closing her eyes to mitigate the vertigo. The buyer. Viktor Volkov. Rodriguez nodded grimly. We know him. Russian organized crime, but he launders it through high-end real estate and art. He's untouchable because he never touches the dirt himself. He buys things that shouldn't exist. If that statue ends up in his dacha outside Moscow, you'll never see it again. The Russian government won't cooperate. It can't go to him, Elena whispered. It's not just a statue, detective. It has a soul. I felt it. Or rather, I didn't feel it on the fake. The real one has been through wars. It was buried in a cellar in 1943 to hide it from the Nazis. It survived the flood of Florence in '66. It doesn't belong to a gangster. Rodriguez glanced at her, his expression softening. We're going to get it. They burst out of the tunnel on the Jersey side. The storm was worse here, the wind coming off the harbor in violent gusts that shook the heavy frame of the Charger. The skyline of Manhattan receded behind them, a glittering fortress of indifference. Ahead lay the industrial wasteland of the docks, a maze of cranes, smokestacks, and endless rows of shipping containers. Where is Pier 4? Rodriguez asked. My GPS is showing it as a condemned zone. It is, Elena said, pulling up the map on her phone, squinting through the cracks in the screen. Go south, past the airport turnoff. Look for the old sugar refinery. It's behind there. Rodriguez drifted the car across 3 lanes of traffic, cutting off a semi-truck that blasted its horn in protest. They sped down a potholed service road, the suspension groaning with every impact. The scenery became increasingly desolate. Rusted chain-link fences, piles of scrap metal, and the looming skeletons of disused cranes. There,
Elena pointed.
through the rain, a massive shape was visible against the gray sky. Cargo ship. It wasn't one of the modern megacarriers. It was an older, mid-sized freighter, its hull streaked with rust, flying a Panamanian flag, the Oceanic Star. And it was moving. Damn it! Rodriguez slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the gravel apron of the pier. A gap of black, churning water was already widening between the ship's hull and the concrete dock. Thick hawser lines had been cast off. A tugboat was churning water at the stern, guiding the vessel out toward the main channel. It's leaving? Elena cried, fumbling with the door handle. We're too late. Not yet. Rodriguez unbuckled his seatbelt. He grabbed the radio handset. Dispatch. I have visual on the target. It is departing Pier 4. I need Harbor Patrol to intercept. Now. Harbor Patrol is 10 minutes out, detective. The radio crackled. They're coming from Bayonne. 10 minutes is too long. It'll be in international waters by then. Rodriguez kicked his door open and ran toward the edge of the pier. Elena stumbled after him, the rain soaking her instantly, washing the dried blood from her face. The ship was about 30 feet away now, moving slowly but gaining momentum. The deck was high above them, a wall of steel. On the bridge wing, Elena could see a figure in a yellow raincoat looking down at them through binoculars. Stop the ship! Rodriguez screamed. waving his badge, a futile gesture against the thousands of tons of steel. The figure on the bridge didn't move. The ship's horn blasted, a deep, earth-shaking sound that vibrated in Elena's chest. It wasn't a greeting, it was a goodbye. "They aren't stopping," Rodriguez spat, holstering his gun. He looked around wildly. "We need a way on board." "There's no gangway," Elena said, her heart sinking. "We missed it." "The pilot boat," Rodriguez pointed. Further down the pier, a small orange pilot ladder was dangling from the side of the freighter, swaying in the wind. A small launch boat had just pulled away, having dropped off the harbor pilot who would guide the ship out. But the ladder hadn't been pulled up yet. "That ladder is 40 feet up," Elena said. "I know." Rodriguez turned to run back to the car. "Get in." "What?" "Get in the car. I'm going to drive parallel to the seawall. There's a service gantry ahead. If we can get ahead of it." They scrambled back into the Charger. Rodriguez slammed the car into gear, tires spinning in the mud before finding traction. He floored it, racing along the edge of the pier, parallel to the moving ship. The speedometer climbed, 60 miles per hour. The pier was running out. Ahead, a rusted metal service bridge extended out over the water, used for maintenance on the cranes. It ended abruptly in mid-air. "Rodriguez, that bridge is broken."
Elena shouted.
"It's close enough." He yelled back. "When we get to the end, I'm gonna slam on the brakes. You bail out and run to the edge. If the ship is aligned, the ladder should be right there." "This is insane. You wanted to save the statue. Vance, this is how we save it." The car roared toward the end of the pier. The ship was moving alongside them, a massive wall of moving steel. The service bridge loomed ahead. Rodriguez slammed the brakes. The car skid, fishtailing violently, coming to a halt just feet from the edge of the drop-off into the dark water below. "Go!" Rodriguez shouted. Elena didn't think. She threw the door open and sprinted. She ran onto the rusted grating of the service bridge. The wind was howling, trying to push her off. Below, the black water churned, frothing white where the ship's wake hit the pilings. She reached the end of the gantry. The ship was passing by. There, the rope ladder. It was dangling, swinging wildly. It was about 6 feet away from the edge of the gantry, and moving away. "Jump!" Rodriguez's voice roared from behind her. Elena looked at the ladder. She looked at the water. She thought of the praying warrior, the cold bronze, the centuries of survival. It had survived the Blitz. It had survived the floods. It was counting on her to survive this. She took a breath, stepped back, and leaped. For a second, she was weightless, suspended in the rain and the dark. Then impact. Her chest slammed into the wooden rungs of the ladder. The air was driven from her lungs. Her fingers clawed frantically at the wet ropes. She slipped, her boots scrambling for purchase on the swinging rungs. She slid down 3 feet, the rough hemp burning her palms. She gasped, hanging by her arms, dangling over the churning wake of the propeller.
Elena!
Rodriguez shouted from the pier. She looked up. She had hold of the ladder. She wrapped her legs around the ropes, securing herself. She was on. She looked back at the gantry. Rodriguez was standing at the edge, his trench coat billowing. He couldn't make the jump. He was too heavy, and the gap had widened. He was pointing up. "Go up!" he yelled, cupping his hands. "Find the container. I'll call the Coast Guard. Just don't let them dump it." Elena nodded, though she doubted he could see it. She turned her face upward. The gunwale of the ship was 30 feet above her. The wind was freezing. Her head was throbbing with a renewed violence. She began to climb. Every rung was a battle. The ship rolled in the swell, slamming the ladder against the steel hull, bruising her knuckles and knees. But she kept moving. Left hand, right hand. Step, step. She reached the top. She peered over the railing. The deck was cluttered with containers, lashed down with steel cables. It was dimly lit by yellow floodlights. She didn't see anyone nearby. The crew was likely busy on the bridge or in the engine room for the departure. She hauled herself over the railing, collapsing onto the cold steel deck. She lay there for a moment, gasping, the rain washing over her. She was shivering uncontrollably now. Shock, hypothermia, and exhaustion all hitting at once. But she was on board. She stood up, swaying. She was alone on a ship full of Russian mobsters, with no weapon, a concussion, and a cell phone that had likely been destroyed by the rain. She looked out at the rows of containers. There were hundreds of them. "Where are you?" she whispered. She remembered the manifest photo she had taken in the archives. Container ID, MSCU 482910. She started walking down the narrow aisles between the towering metal boxes. The ship rolled as it hit the open waters of the bay. The Statue of Liberty was visible in the distance, a small green torch against the black sky, watching indifferently as her namesake museum's greatest treasure was stolen right under her nose. Elena checked the numbers on the containers. MSCU 482. She turned a corner near the stern, and she stopped. There were two men standing by a red container. One of them was holding a tablet. The other was holding a pry bar. It was the driver and the gunman from the museum. They had made it to the ship before her. Elena ducked behind a blue container, her heart hammering. "Boss says check the straps," the gunman said, his voice carrying over the wind. "He's nervous about the weather. If this thing shifts inside the crate, the bronze could crack." "It's fine," the driver grunted. "We're clear. The cops are looking for a truck in Queens. By the time they figure it out, we'll be in international waters." They were right in front of it. The red container. MSCU 482910. Elena looked around for a weapon. A loose pipe, a wrench, anything. She found a heavy iron turnbuckle used for lashing cargo lying on the deck. She picked it up. It weighed about 5 pounds. She wasn't a fighter. She was a conservator. She fixed things. But right now, she was going to have to break something. The ship lurched again, harder this time. The gunman stumbled slightly. "Go inside and check the bracing," the gunman told the driver. "I'll smoke." The driver unlocked the container doors and slipped inside. The gunman turned his back to the wind, cupping his hands to light a cigarette. This was her chance. Elena tightened her grip on the iron bar. She stepped out from the shadows. The rain masked her footsteps. The wind masked her breathing. She crept up behind the gunman. He was staring out at the receding lights of New York City, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Hey," she said. The gunman turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the battered, bloodied woman he thought he had left unconscious on a loading dock in Manhattan. "You!" He didn't finish the sentence. Elena swung the turnbuckle with all the desperation and rage of the last 4 hours. It connected with his wrist, the one holding the gun. Bone cracked. The gun clattered to the deck. The man howled, clutching his wrist, dropping to his knees. Elena kicked the gun away, sending it sliding under the railing and into the dark Atlantic Ocean. The driver heard the scream and burst out of the container. "What the?" He saw Elena standing over his partner, the iron bar raised, her eyes wild, her hair plastered to her skull like a vengeful spirit. "Get back!" she screamed, swinging the bar at him. "Get back, or I swear to God I will break your knees." The driver hesitated. He was big, but he was a bully, not a soldier. And the woman in front of him looked like she had absolutely nothing left to lose. "You're trapped, lady," the driver sneered, pulling a knife from his belt. "Nowhere to run." "I don't need to run," Elena said, backing up until her back hit the open door of the container. She could see the wooden crate inside. "I just need to hold you off until the Coast Guard gets here." "Coast Guard ain't here," the driver grinned, stepping forward. "Just us." Suddenly, a blinding beam of white light cut through the darkness from the sky. The roar of a helicopter rotor drowned out the storm. Thwack, 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 thwack. A loudspeaker boomed from above, shaking the very deck plates. "This is the United States Coast Guard. Heave to and prepare to be boarded. All hands on deck. Put your weapons down." Elena looked up, shielding her eyes against the searchlight. The chopper was hovering right above the ship, a sniper clearly visible in the open door. In the distance, the lights of a fast-response cutter were tearing through the waves, flanked by a familiar NYPD harbor unit. Rodriguez had made the call. The driver dropped his knife. He raised his hands. The gunman on the floor just groaned, cradling his broken wrist. Elena lowered the iron bar. Her legs gave out. She slid down the side of the container, hitting the deck. She looked inside the open metal doors. The crate was there, safe. She closed her eyes, listening to the beautiful sound of the helicopter, and let the darkness finally take her. The world returned not with a flash of light, but with a vibration that rattled the very marrow of Elena's bones. It was a deep, thrumming rhythm, like the heartbeat of a leviathan, accompanied by the smell of aviation fuel and the stinging spray of salt water. Elena peeled her eyes open, her lashes sticky with dried blood and rain. The first thing she saw was the dark, corrugated ceiling of a helicopter cabin, illuminated by the red glow of tactical instruments. She tried to sit up, but a heavy hand on her chest gently pushed her back down. "Easy, Ms. Vance. We're 5 minutes out from the battery. Just breathe." The Coast Guard medic was young, his face obscured by a helmet and visor, but his voice was calm, the voice of a man who plucked people from freezing oceans for a living. Elena turned her head to the side, fighting the wave of nausea that rolled over her. Through the open bay door of the helicopter, she saw the churning black water of the harbor below. Further back, framed by the sweeping beams of searchlights, the oceanic star looked like a toy boat, surrounded by the sharp, white wakes of the cutters swarming its hull. "The container," Elena rasped, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rotors. "Did you secure the container?" The medic tapped his headset, listening to internal comms, then looked back at her. "The ship is under USCG control. The vessel has been ordered to drop anchor. Nothing is leaving that deck. Focus on yourself right now. You've got a grade 2 concussion and mild hypothermia." Elena let her head fall back against the canvas stretcher. She closed her eyes, but the image of the red steel doors of container MSU 482910 was burned into her retinas. She had done it. She had thrown herself into the void, climbed a moving ship, and bludgeoned a gunman with a piece of rusted iron. It felt like a memory belonging to someone else, a different Elena Vance, one who didn't spend her days dusting marble with soft brushes. The helicopter banked sharply, the city skyline tilting in the window. The lights of lower Manhattan were a sprawling grid of diamonds, indifferent to the violence of the night. As they descended toward the helipad at the Battery Park City Terminal, Elena felt the adrenaline finally drain away, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. When the skids touched down, the world became a flurry of activity. The doors slid open, and she was unloaded onto a gurney. The air here was slightly warmer, smelling of wet asphalt and city exhaust. As they wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance, a figure broke through the line of uniformed officers. "Vance!" It was Detective Rodriguez. He looked like a wreck, his trench coat ruined, mud splattered up to his knees, his face pale under the harsh floodlights of the helipad. He jogged alongside the gurney, ignoring the EMTs who tried to wave him back. "I'm okay," Elena said, reaching out to grab his arm. "I'm fine. Rodriguez, tell me they have it." "We have it," Rodriguez said, breathless. "The harbor unit boarded right after the chopper. The captain of the Oceanic Star is claiming ignorance, singing like a canary about a last-minute cargo add-on. We have the 2 shooters in custody. The ship is being escorted back to Pier 36. We're seizing the cargo." "I need to be there," Elena said, trying to sit up again. "I need to open it. You don't know what to look for. If they swapped it. If it's another fake." "You're going to the hospital," Rodriguez said firmly. "No," Elena countered, her voice gaining a sharp, jagged edge. "If you send me to the hospital, I will sign myself out AMA the second I get there. That statue is my responsibility. I am the only one who can verify the provenance. Take me to Pier 36, Rodriguez. Please, I need to see it." Rodriguez looked at her, He saw the bruising spreading across her temple, the tremors in her hands, but he also saw the iron resolve that had driven her to jump off a pier. He knew he couldn't stop her. He nodded to the EMTs. "Patch her up here. She rides with me." The drive to Pier 36 was a blur of siren noise and windshield wipers. The storm was finally breaking, the torrential rain slowing to a steady, miserable drizzle. When they pulled into the NYPD impound lot at the pier, the scene was chaotic. Police cruisers, unmarked federal vehicles, and customs trucks formed a barricade of flashing lights. In the center of the chaos, looming like a captured beast, was the Oceanic Star, now tied up alongside the dock. A massive shoreside crane was already in operation, its cables descending toward the deck of the ship. Elena got out of the car, wrapping a foil thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders. She stood next to Rodriguez, watching as the crane's spreader bar locked onto the corners of the red container. Clank, whir. The diesel engine of the crane roared, and the container lifted into the air. It hovered for a moment, swaying slightly in the wind, a 40-foot steel box that held the fate of the museum and Elena's career. Slowly, agonizingly, it was lowered onto the wet concrete of the pier, designated as Evidence Zone A. "Let's go," Rodriguez said, lifting the yellow police tape for her. They walked toward the container. A team of customs officers was waiting with bolt cutters. A forensic photographer was snapping pictures of the seal number.
Seal trellid 88,921.
Intact. "Cut it," Rodriguez ordered. The bolt cutters snapped through the heavy metal seal with a sharp crack. The locking bars were rotated. The doors groaned open, revealing the dark interior. Elena stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smell hit her first: damp wood, straw, and the faint metallic scent of bronze. It was the smell of history. Inside, strapped to the floor with heavy-duty ratchets, was the wooden crate. It was identical to the one Silverline had delivered to the museum, but to Elena's trained eye, the differences were screaming. The wood of this crate was older, darker. The stencil markings were faded. "Get the crowbars," Rodriguez said to the officers. "Wait," Elena said, stepping into the container. "Let me." She didn't have her tools. She didn't have her drill. But she needed to be the one. She took a pry bar from one of the officers. Her hands were shaking, but she wedged the tip under the front panel of the crate. She leaned her weight into it. The wood shrieked, nails pulling free with a sound like pistol shots. She worked methodically, ignoring the pain in her head, ignoring the circle of armed men watching her. She was a conservator. She was unearthing a relic. She pried the final board loose and let it clatter to the metal floor of the container. She reached in and pulled away the layers of coarse burlap and straw, packing materials that dated back to the 1940s, not the modern foam used in the fake. And there he was, the praying warrior. He was exactly as she remembered him from the photographs in the archives, but infinitely more present. In the harsh glare of the police floodlights, the bronze drank in the light rather than reflecting it. The surface was uneven, pitted with the microscopic scars of time. The patina was a complex map of greens, browns, and blacks, a chemical reaction that had taken 500 years to perfect. Elena dropped the pry bar. She took off the thermal blanket, letting it fall to the dirty floor. She approached the statue as if it were a living thing. She didn't wear gloves. This was a crime scene, yes, but it was also a reunion. She placed her hand on the warrior's bowed head. Cold. It was freezing. A deep, biting cold that radiated from the core of the metal. A cold that spoke of density, of mass, of a solid heart of copper and tin. Felt heavy, grounded, real. "Is it him?" Rodriguez asked, his voice low. Elena didn't answer immediately. She knelt down on the wet floor of the container. She ran her thumb along the base of the statue, searching. She needed the fingerprint, the flaw. Her finger caught on a ridge. There, on the rear left corner of the plinth, was the V-shaped gouge. The scar from 1942, caused when a crate was dropped during the hurried evacuation from the London Blitz. It was sharp, jagged, and absolutely imperfect. Tears pricked Elena's eyes, hot and sudden. "It's him," she whispered. "It's the original." She slumped back against the container wall, the relief hitting her so hard it felt like a physical blow. "We got him back." Rodriguez let out a long breath, rubbing his face with his hands. "Good. That's good." He turned to his team. "All right, seal it up. I want an armed guard on this container 24/7 until it's transferred back to the museum vault. Nobody touches it without my direct authorization. Forensics, bag the packing material." As the officers moved in to secure the evidence, Rodriguez offered a hand to Elena. She took it, and he hauled her to her feet. "You did good, Vance," he said. "Crazy, but good." "Marcus," Elena said, steadying herself. "Where is he?" "Central booking," Rodriguez said. "We're holding him on grand larceny, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. He's lawyered up, but with the scan you preserved and the recovery of the original, he's finished. He'll never see the inside of a museum again, unless he's on a chain gang cleaning the floors." "I want to see him," Elena said. Rodriguez frowned. "Elena, go home. Get some sleep. You can give your statement tomorrow." "No." She shook her head. "I need to look him in the eye. I need him to know that he didn't win. It's not about the law, Rodriguez. It's personal. He was my mentor. He taught me everything I know about protecting art, and he used that knowledge to try and destroy it. I need closure." Rodriguez studied her face for a moment, then sighed. "Come on. The first precinct is on the way to the hospital. I can give you 5 minutes." The interrogation room at the first precinct was a stark, windowless box painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. The two-way mirror dominated one wall, a black, reflective eye. Elena stood on the observation side, watching. Marcus Thorne sat at the metal table, handcuffed to the chair. He looked diminished. Without his tailored suit jacket, without the backdrop of the museum, he was just an old, tired man in a wrinkled shirt. His silver hair was disheveled, and his posture was slumped. "He hasn't said a word since we brought him in," the desk sergeant said, standing beside Elena. "Just asked for water." "Open the door," Elena said. The sergeant looked at Rodriguez. Rodriguez nodded. The buzzer sounded, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Elena walked inside. Marcus looked up. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. He took in the bandage on her head, the blood on her clothes, the exhaustion in her stance. For a fleeting second, there was shame in his expression, before the mask of the arrogant director slid back into place. "You look terrible, my dear," Marcus said, his voice raspy. "I found it, Marcus," Elena said, her voice steady. She didn't sit down. She stood over him. "We stopped the ship. The praying warrior is sitting in an NYPD evidence locker right now. It's over." Marcus let out a short, dry laugh. He leaned back, the handcuffs clinking against the chair. "Over? You think this is over because you recovered one statue? Elena, you are so brilliantly talented, but so painfully naive. You sold us out for gambling debts," Elena said. "There's nothing complex about that. It's just pathetic." "It wasn't just the debts," Marcus snapped, a flash of anger breaking through. "Do you have any idea what it costs to run that place? The Liberty was dying. The endowments were drying up. The board wanted to sell off the collection piece by piece just to keep the lights on. I made a deal. One piece. One sacrifice to save the whole collection. Volkov's money would have funded us for a decade." "You don't get to decide what gets sacrificed," Elena said cold. "You aren't the owner, Marcus. You're just the caretaker. Like me. We serve the history, we don't sell it. History doesn't pay the electric bill." Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I did what I had to do. And you destroyed it. Now the scandal will ruin the museum. Donors will flee. The Liberty will close within a year. You didn't save the museum, Elena. You buried it." Elena looked at him, and she realized he truly believed it. He had twisted his own moral compass so many times that he had lost true north. "Maybe," Elena said softly, "maybe the museum will close. Maybe my career is over. But the truth matters. The object matters. We don't lie about what is real. That is the one rule. You broke it. She turned to the door. She had seen enough. The man she respected was gone, replaced by this desperate, deluded stranger. Volkov won't be happy, Marcus whispered as she reached for the handle. The threat hung in the air, cold and heavy. He doesn't like loose ends. You should be careful, Elena.
Elena paused.
She looked back at him, her eyes hard. Let him come. I'll x-ray him too. She walked out, the heavy door slamming shut behind her, sealing Marcus in his box of silence. Outside the precinct, the dawn was breaking. The storm had passed completely, leaving the streets of New York washed clean and glistening. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, transitioning to gold over the East River. Elena sat on the steps of the station, holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee that Rodriguez had pressed into her hands. The detective leaned against the railing, lighting a cigarette. He threatened you, Rodriguez said. It wasn't a question. I heard it on the monitor. He's trying to scare me, Elena said, blowing on the coffee. Is Volkov real? Very. Rodriguez exhaled a plume of smoke. But he's a businessman. He cuts his losses. With the statue in police custody and Thorne in jail, Volkov will distance himself. He won't come after you. It brings too much heat. You're safe. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him completely. She felt a strange vibration in her pocket. Her phone. It must have dried out just enough to turn on. She pulled it out. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed with fractures. There was one new notification. An email. It wasn't from the museum. It wasn't from the police. It was from an encrypted address. She tapped it open. Subject. Acknowledgement. Body. The copy was excellent. The flaw was in the weight. Next time we will use tungsten fillers. You have a sharp eye, Ms. Vance. We appreciate talent. Ideally, we would like to hire you. If not, we simply ask that you do not interfere with the shipment leaving Boston next week. Consider this professional courtesy. Elena stared at the screen. The blood drained from her face. What is it? Rodriguez asked, tossing his cigarette away. Boston, Elena whispered. He said Boston. Who? The forger. Elena looked up, her eyes wide. Marcus didn't make the fake Rodriguez. He's not an artist. He's an administrator. He hired someone. A professional forgery ring. Yeah, we figured. We'll get the name out of Thorne. No. Elena stood up, the coffee splashing onto the pavement. You don't understand. The email. They aren't stopping. They said, the shipment leaving Boston next week. This wasn't a one-time job. Marcus was just one client. They are hitting museums all over the East Coast. She showed the phone to Rodriguez. He squinted at the cracked screen, reading the text. His jaw tightened. Boston, he muttered. The Museum of Fine Arts? Or the Gardner? Does it matter? Elena said, the exhaustion vanishing, replaced by a new, burning purpose. Someone is replacing history with high-tech lies on an industrial scale. And they just told me where they are striking next. Rodriguez looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that he wasn't going to get to write those traffic tickets in Staten Island anytime soon. Vance, he warned. You are a witness. You are not a cop. I know, Elena said, looking out at the rising sun. I'm a conservator, and there is a lot of rot left to clean up. She looked at him. Do you have a contact in Boston PD? Rodriguez sighed. A long, deep sound of resignation. He pulled his keys out of his pocket. Get in the car, Elena. I need to make a call. The story of the praying warrior was over. But the war for the truth had just begun. The Amtrak Acela sliced through the Connecticut coastline, a silver bullet racing against the gray blur of the Atlantic Ocean. Elena Vance sat by the window, watching the landscape dissolve into streaks of green and slate. The bandage on her temple had been replaced by a small, butterfly strip, and the bruising around her eye had faded to a pale yellow, but the headache still lingered, a dull, rhythmic throb that reminded her she was alive. Across the table, Detective Rodriguez was asleep. The large man looked incongruous in the cramped train seat, his arms folded over his chest, his head lolling slightly with the motion of the carriage. He was snoring softly. It was the first time Elena had seen him look peaceful since the night on the docks 2 weeks ago. She looked down at the tablet in her lap. The dossier on the screen was thin. Target: the Athenaeum of Boston. Object: the head of Janus. Material: marble. Origin: 2nd century Rome. The email from the forger had been a taunt, but it was also a map. The shipment leaving Boston. Rodriguez had pulled strings, called in favors with the FBI art crime team, and secured them a narrow window of jurisdiction. They weren't going in as cops. They were going in as consultants. The Athenaeum was preparing to auction off a minor piece of their collection to fund a roof restoration. The buyer was anonymous. The seller was the museum itself. It seemed legitimate, but Elena knew better now. The rot didn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, as with Marcus, it grew from within. "We're passing Providence," Rodriguez mumbled, opening one eye. He sat up, cracking his neck. "You okay? You've been staring at that picture of the marble head for an hour." "It's too perfect," Elena said, zooming in on the high-resolution image of the Janus head. The weathering on the nose, the chip on the left ear. It aligns perfectly with the catalog description from 1910. So it's real? Or it's a copy made by someone who studied the catalog better than the curators did? Elena replied, turning off the screen. "The forger told me they used tungsten fillers for the bronze to mimic the weight. For marble, they won't use tungsten. They'll use composite dust mixed with resin, aged with acid. Passes the visual test. Passes the UV light test. But it won't pass the sound." "The sound?" Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Stone sings," Elena said softly. "If you tap it with a silver hammer, ancient marble has a specific resonance. The crystal structure has settled over 2,000 years. Resin sounds dead. It sounds like plastic trying to be rock. So your plan is to walk into a high-security auction preview and hit $1 million statue with a hammer?" "A very small hammer," Elena corrected, a faint smile touching her lips. "And yes, that's exactly the plan." The train slowed as it entered the sprawl of Boston. The city felt different from New York, older in a different way, more brick, more reserved. They took a cab to Beacon Hill. The Athenaeum was a fortress of brownstone and iron gates, radiating an aura of impenetrable wealth. They showed their credentials at the side entrance. The head of security, a nervous man named O'Malley, didn't look happy to see them. "We've already scanned the piece," O'Malley insisted as he led them through the hushed corridors. "We used ultrasound. No internal anomalies." "The forgers know about ultrasound," Elena said, her voice echoing in the gallery. "They build the internal density to match the frequency return. You're fighting a war with weapons from the last decade. They're using technology from next year." They reached the viewing room. In the center, bathed in a soft, heavenly spotlight, sat the head of Janus, the two-faced god, looking both forward to the future and backward to the past. It was hauntingly beautiful. The white stone seemed to glow from within. Elena put down her bag. She didn't take out a hammer immediately. She walked around the sculpture. She breathed it in. She closed her eyes, letting her senses take over. The smell of the room, wax polish, old velvet, and something else. A faint, sharp scent. Vinegar, acetic acid, used to fake age on limestone and marble. But it should have evaporated years ago if this piece was from the 2nd century. "It smells new," Elena whispered. "I don't smell anything," O'Malley said, crossing his arms. "Ms. Vance, the auction starts in 3 hours. The buyer's agent is already in the lobby. If you damage this piece..." "If I damage a fake, I'm doing you a favor," Elena said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver tuning fork. She didn't use a hammer. She struck the fork against her own knee to get it vibrating, then pressed the stem gently against the base of the marble neck. She pressed her ear close to the stone. If it were solid, ancient marble, the vibration would travel through the lattice structure, producing a clean, sustained hum. She listened. Thud. The vibration died instantly, absorbed, dampened. Resin core, she announced, standing up. It's a shell. A beautiful, masterful shell. But inside, it's just high-density epoxy. That's impossible, O'Malley sputtered. Rodriguez. Elena nodded to the detective. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. He wasn't an art critic, but he trusted Elena Vance more than he trusted his own eyesight. He stepped forward, flashing his badge to the security team. I'm declaring this object a potential crime scene under federal jurisdiction. Nobody moves it. And lock the doors. We need to find whoever authenticated this. The next hour was a blur of shouting, phone calls, and panic. The curator who had signed off on the piece was found in his office, sweating profusely, his bag packed. He crumbled under Rodriguez's questioning in 10 minutes. It was the same story as Marcus: debts, blackmail, and a shadowy offer from a broker who promised a perfect replica and a payout. But the broker wasn't there. The forger wasn't there. Just the art, sitting on its pedestal, smiling its two-faced smile. Elena stood alone in the viewing room while the police swarmed the offices. She looked at the fake Janus. It really was a masterpiece of deception. The person who made this didn't just want money. They wanted to prove they could rewrite reality. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She knew who it was before she looked. Subject: impressive. Body: you have a good ear, Elena. Marble is difficult. Most people never check the resonance. We are canceling the shipment. The buyer has been refunded. No harm done. But you are becoming a nuisance. Go back to New York. Enjoy your victory. The war is too big for one soldier. Elena typed a reply, her fingers steady. Reply: I'm not a soldier. I'm a conservator. And I'm not going anywhere. She hit send. She looked up at the fake god. I see you, she whispered. The return to New York was quiet. They arrived late at night, the city glistening under a clear, star-filled sky. Rodriguez dropped her off in front of her apartment building. You did good today, he said, leaning across the passenger seat. Boston PD is rolling up the local network. We stopped a $2 million fraud. We stopped the sale, Elena said, leaning against the door frame. But we didn't catch the artist. They're still out there, Rodriguez, creating history. We'll get them, Rodriguez said, and for the first time, he sounded like he believed it, not because it was his job, but because he wanted it to be true. Get some sleep, Vance. The gala is tomorrow. You're the guest of honor. I'm just the staff, she smiled tiredly. Not anymore, he grinned. See you there. He drove off, the taillights fading into the canyon of the avenue. Elena stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the cool night air. She touched the scar on her temple. It was tender, but it was healing. The next night, the Liberty Museum was transformed. The Great Hall was awash in golden light. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. The air was filled with the murmur of the city's elite. Donors, politicians, critics, all gathered to celebrate the miraculous recovery of the museum's greatest treasure. Elena stood on the balcony overlooking the main floor. She wore a simple black dress, blending into the shadows. She watched the crowd below. They were drinking, laughing, admiring the architecture, unaware of how close this entire building had come to being a hollow shell, gutted by greed. Hiding? She turned. Marcus Thorne wasn't there. He was in a cell at Rikers Island, awaiting trial. The new interim director, a stern but fair woman named Sarah Jenkins, was standing beside her. Just observing, Elena said. They're waiting for you, Sarah said, gesturing to the podium below. The mayor wants to shake your hand. The board wants to give you a plaque. You saved the institution, Elena. I didn't do it for the board, Elena said quietly. I know, Sarah smiled. That's why you're the only person fit to lead the department. I'm promoting you, Elena, head of conservation and collections. Complete autonomy. No more asking for permission to use the X-ray machine. Elena looked at her. Complete autonomy? Within reason, Sarah laughed. But yes, we need eyes that see what others miss. Will you take it? Elena looked down at her hands. The hands that had cleaned centuries of dirt. The hands that had held a dying man's weapon. The hands that had touched the cold truth of the bronze. Yes, she said. I'll take it. Good. Now come down. It's time for the unveil. They walked down the grand staircase together. The crowd parted for them. Applause rippled through the room, growing louder until it was a thunderous ovation. Elena felt her face flush, but she kept her head high. She spotted Rodriguez near the bar, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, giving her a thumbs up. She walked onto the stage. In the center, covered by a velvet drape, stood the statue. The room went silent. Elena stepped forward. She didn't look at the audience. She looked at the shape under the cloth. She reached out and grasped the fabric. With a smooth motion, she pulled the drape away. The praying warrior was revealed. A collective gasp went through the hall. He was magnificent. The cleaning Elena had performed over the last 2 weeks had removed the salt and the grime of the docks, but she had left the scars. The scratch on the base from 1942 remained. The uneven patina on the shoulder remained. He knelt there, head bowed, hands clasping the sword. He looked exhausted. He looked sorrowful. But mostly he looked heavy. He held the weight of his own history. Elena stepped back, letting the spotlight claim him. She looked at the statue, and for a moment, the room fell away. It was just the two of them, the conservator and the warrior. She remembered the moment in the container, the cold touch that had told her the truth. She realized then that her job wasn't about chemicals or microscopes or insurance forms. It was about listening to the whispers of things that could not speak. It was about protecting the memory of the world from the people who wanted to rewrite it for profit. The forger in Boston, the email, the tungsten fillers. They were still out there. There were other fakes in other museums, other lies sitting on pedestals waiting to be discovered. The war wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. But looking at the warrior, Elena felt a strange, warm peace settle in her chest. She wasn't afraid anymore. The cold of the bronze didn't chill her. It grounded her. She knew what was real. And as long as she stood watch, the truth would not be stolen. She reached out and placed her hand gently on the warrior's shoulder, right over the spot where the fake had been warm, and the real one was cold. "I'm here," she whispered to the metal. A promise made to the past and the future.
I'm listening.
The warrior seemed to bow his head a fraction lower in the light, a silent acknowledgement between two survivors. Elena turned to face the blinding flash of the cameras, no longer shielding her eyes. She smiled, not for the press, but for herself. The story was written in bronze, and it would not be erased.